Yeah, like if I can give someone some training material that's going to get them to use LabVIEW for the first time, hopefully get excited by it, I think that's great.
Welcome to the LabVIEW Experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. Hi, I am here today with Tom McQuillan, who now works for
Howdy.
JKI. You worked somewhere else before? I don't remember what that was. Some lab?
Yeah, so before JKI, I worked for Scientifica, who was a neuroscience research company developing G for microscopy applications. So yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and you and I collaborated a while ago on some Gang of Four stuff, putting together some of the Gang of Four design patterns. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? That might be a good place to start.
Yeah, let's start there actually. Because actually before this chat, I went into my bookshelf and brought out my
Oh,
design patterns Gang of Four book. So when we're talking about the Gang of Four, we're talking about the four authors of this book. Design patterns, elements of reusable, object-oriented code. Um, and I noticed I had two bookmarks in here. The first one was on the composite pattern, the second one was on the visitor pattern. And I was trying to remember, like, why? What was I using these patterns for? I realized the very first project I had at JKI, I was feeling a bit overwhelmed. There were lots of moving parts and lots of changing variables. But I think just before that, you and I were chatting through the Gang of Four and coming up with LabVIEW examples of, how do we organize LabVIEW classes and objects in our code. Um, and so I think because we had done that, I could then use those examples directly in my project at JKI. And thinking back, it was a test executive I was creating. After trying to convince the customer to use test stand, they opted for me to build it from scratch. So that's fine. But I had like hundreds of different test steps, which, I thought, okay, let's make those classes. Simple plugin architecture. Fine. How do I handle all of those steps and combine them into sequences? And maybe sequences can call other sequences. And maybe we create this massive tree. And then that's where I got the composite pattern. And the composite pattern in this book taught me, how to manage all of those objects, how to share code in those objects, how to traverse through this sequence step hierarchy. Um, and then the other really cool thing about this project was test reports. So I have a bunch of different categories of step type that produce string results or Boolean results, numeric results, or just action steps. And each of those need to go into a report. That might be an HTML report, it might just be a graphical report, a PDF, whatever the customer wants. So, how do I merge these two types of object together? And I was thinking, okay, I need double dispatch, double dynamic dispatch, which led me on to, I guess, the visitor pattern in this book. And I think at that stage of my career, so I've been talking for a while now, but I think at that stage of my career, this book was really good at breaking down all of these challenges, these sections of code, and providing a solution. Um, so yeah, spending the time with you, Sam, and just studying this book was a huge help in my
Yeah,
growth.
I think that's a really good example. And I think part of the problem with learning the object-oriented design patterns, I feel like you need a specific example to work with. So if you just learn them and you read the book, it's like it's interesting and maybe you think you get it, but then when you see it actually in action in an actual example, I think it kind of brings it home because I object-oriented can be very abstract at times and it's hard to wrap your head around it without a good concrete
Yeah.
example.
And even the examples that I guess we came up with, or um, the NI examples of a car wash or an ATM or a microwave, a treadmill, but trying to take those like CLD level examples and actually apply them into automated test equipment is difficult.
There is a website that Stefan put me on. It's refactoring.guru. I don't know if you've seen it, but they have some refactoring
Yeah.
stuff, but they also have some design pattern stuff, and they have an ebook, and it's actually really good. And I find the original Gang of Four book a little too dry and computer sciencey, and the examples are okay, but the Refactoring Guru book I think has much better examples, and the guy's much better at explaining it. So if anybody wants to check that out, it's actually on sale right now. So it's worth the 20
Yeah,
bucks.
I'd absolutely agree with that. So programming.guru is where I spent most of my time learning these patterns. This book was is really good as it takes you through writing a what you see is what you get text editor.
Hmm.
And so it does have examples, but as you say, it's a very dry read.
Yeah.
The other book I'd recommend is, I think it's called Head First Programming
Hmm.
or Head First Design Patterns. You can find that on Amazon for 20 quid or something. Um, and that's a very conversational book. It's much easier to read than the original Gang of Four.
I haven't read the head first one, but I hear good things about it. The thing I like about the Refactoring Guru one is it gives you really good guidance on how all the patterns are similar and related, and also kind of gives you some guidance on when to pick one over the other. Because there are several that are similar and they look the same, but the intent is different. And that's quite useful to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one thing I was thinking about before this podcast was how studying this book gives you all of the knowledge of like pattern recognition in objects and how you might organize your code. Even like the wisdom is the hands-on experience you gain from just trying something out. I think this book is a really good safety net because if you find a pattern that meets your requirements, even if it's in the wrong context, like you were speaking about, your problem will still be solved. You might run into future issues, but ultimately your software is going to work.
Hmm.
It's tried and tested.
Yeah. A couple other points. One, if you're going to read that book, I highly recommend you have some understanding of UML. So I think it's useful. There's a Martin Fowler book on UML, UML Distilled, that's pretty good. The other thing I was going to mention too is the Refactoring Guru. One of the things I like that I don't think is in the original Gang of Four. I don't remember if the original Gang of Four talks about Solid at all, but in Refactoring Guru they have a section on Solid and they give some really good examples. And I think those examples really like it's like here's a before, here's something that doesn't meet the solid principle. And then, if you wanted to make this change, it would be really hard. And here's something that does meet the solid principle. And if you want to make this particular change, you can see how it would be much easier to make the change. And I feel like those kind of concrete examples that you can look at and you'd be like, yep, that makes sense.
I think that's a really good point. I think the when I was saying how the patterns in this book will make your software work, um, it doesn't necessarily future-proof your software. I think if you go with something like the visitor pattern or the state pattern, you're given a framework, you're given a grid, and you need to fill in the functionality for each of those boxes in the grid. So if you have any requirements that involve creating a new class, you get extra boxes, you write new methods in, it will work, but you are constrained. If the customer comes with a proper left field request, you then need to break your design. Find backdoors into this design pattern. So I think that's where the wisdom and growth comes in. Like, sure, you can use these patterns, but make sure you don't design yourself into a corner.
Well, so that's interesting because one of the things I've been trying to teach a lot lately and trying to get people to appreciate is the art of refactoring. I feel like it's something that's underappreciated, but part of being good at refactoring is also having a good sense of design. So as you're changing and modifying the code, you have a place to go, right? So you're looking at, you're like, oh, they're doing this. There's a pattern that does that. Let's massage this code and get it into the pattern so that then I can add this new feature and it'll be a lot easier because like, once I get in the pattern, then adding the new feature is just adding another class and that's easy. But getting people to understand that is really hard.
Yeah. And I think learning the things in this book, I was explaining this to someone the other day, actually. It's akin to an athlete doing weight training in the gym. That athlete isn't going to find a treadmill in the middle of a football pitch, but training in the gym will strengthen them, give them better abilities out there on the pitch. Learning this book will help you, yeah, find patterns to refactor into, and I think it expands the way you think about problems. Uh, I think a lot of the code I write now is similar to patterns you find in this book and similar to patterns like I find on Stack Overflow, but I've been able to adapt them to meet my own needs.
Yeah, something I find interesting about the sports analogy, I feel like a lot of us, so if you think about an athlete, they spend a lot of time training in order to perform. And we don't spend, typically, software engineers, we don't spend almost any time training. We spend all our time performing. And I think it's really valuable to take a step
Yeah.
back occasionally and have a regular practice, even if it's only like 1 hour a week over a lunch break. I sit and I do some exercises or do some katas or I practice just getting used to moving around the IDE more efficiently. Right? Because when you're trying to just churn out code and you're under a deadline, you're not going to explore and try new IDE shortcuts. You're not going to research design patterns and say, hey, is there a better design pattern for this? You're going to grab the first thing that works and you're just going to do it, even if it's inefficient, just because I need to get it out the door.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I've very much been trying to encourage teams to do is to do that. And also when you set aside a time for that, I also like building some slack into your schedule and things and like, okay, if one week you have to rush to get something done, maybe you can push aside the training and that's okay. And that gives you a little bit more ability to respond to things.
On a side topic, one thing I've been thinking about doing is revising some of the old Advent of Code challenges.
Mhm.
They're not a group of challenges I've attempted before, but as you were saying, it's like a nice daily exercise that you can do, test out your programming like, ability, try out new techniques. Sam, have you tried this out before?
I
The Advent of
use
Code.
the Advent of Code occasionally when I want to practice like pair programming or mob programming with the group. I'm like, hey, let's grab an Advent of Code problem. And I grab usually one of the early days because they're usually easier and you can usually get them done
Yeah.
in an hour. I really, really like the Advent of Code for practice because it's nice because it has two parts. So you build the first part and it's nice because they don't always expand in the way you would think. And so sometimes you like, as engineers, I feel we have this tendency sometimes to over engineer and say, oh, well, we need to be able to expand in this direction, this direction, this direction. And then you do that. And then the problem expands in a third direction that you didn't think about. And now you've almost painted yourself into a corner. So I do quite like that it teaches you to think about expansion, but not to like over optimize on it to begin with.
Do you know what the second part is going to be before you finish the first part?
In advent of code, they don't tell you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, yeah. You get a problem statement, you solve that, and then they say, oh, there was a problem. This doesn't get converted this way, this something else, or oh, you know, it's much larger than we thought, and now you've got this scaling problem where like, yeah, your algorithm took 10 seconds on the first set of data. Okay, yeah, you can wait 10 seconds, but now the second set of data is 100 times larger or something like that, right? And it doesn't scale well. So I do that a lot. There's also, I don't know if you've been paying attention, I've been collecting a LabVIEW katas. So there's this idea of katas in the out there that are like practice problems. And
All
there's
right.
a whole bunch of them. They really fall into two categories. So one is test-driven development katas, where basically it's just a problem statement, and those translate easily into any language because it's just like write a scoring for bowling or for tennis or something, right? And you can do that pretty easily in any language. The harder ones are the refactoring katas, where you have some code that's messed up in some way that's not ideal, and then you have to go and try and change it. Yeah, it's gitlab.com/sas-lv-katas. I've got at least a dozen that I've translated into LabVIEW, and we can use more. Emily Bache is the one who's been kind of collecting them, and she has probably hundreds. And so I've just been, as I find stuff that I want to practice, I go and I find one of her katas that does that. And then I look at the Python version and translate it into LabVIEW, which is interesting because sometimes, so translating them from Python to LabVIEW is challenging because they're intentionally written poorly. So I have to write poor code, which is like goes against everything that I've trained myself to do for years. But then also sometimes I can't tell what are idioms of Python, like the way they would do it in Python versus how I would do it in LabVIEW. And should I leave it that way, or should I translate it to how I would do it knowing a LabVIEW and make it more idiomatic? So it's interesting. Sometimes it helps if you look at the kind, you can figure out like, okay, what is the one thing that this kata is trying to teach you? And then you keep that, and everything else you can make idiomatic, and then it doesn't, it just looks better, and it feels more natural. Because sometimes I feel like when I'm translating those, I'm writing code like a C programmer would write LabVIEW code. I'm sure you've seen with like all the local variables and stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, most people who are not C coders are not doing that too much once they gain some experience. Or at least that's my, if you grew up just knowing LabVIEW code, you probably don't do the local variables everywhere thing.
No, and I think that was also a fun exercise when we were doing this gang of four. So like going through the book, it's written for, I think, C++.
Hmm.
Um, and translating from this book into G isn't just a straightforward verb to verb translation.
Hmm.
It's about changing your mindset. I had another customer a few years ago who needed an API written in LabVIEW, and they gave me their entire Python repository. And I was going through that repository, and at first I tried to go function by function and work out, what's the gist of this function. I'll translate that into LabVIEW as is. But it turned out that wasn't particularly helpful. What was helpful was trying to take a step back and understand why is this code being used in the first place? What was the ultimate objective? And then create my own assumptions, and then use the Python code to test if my assumptions were correct. And I think that's a way that I wrote a really good G API, loosely based on a true story, loosely based on Python.
Yeah, were you wrapping those
But
stuff, or you just translated it from one to the other?
I translated it. I was thinking about, wrapping it, calling it with like the JKI Python node or the LabVIEW Python node. But, there are so many external dependencies, and it wasn't portable code. I couldn't just
Yeah,
call it directly. So
yeah, that happens in Python. I mean, that happens everywhere. Managing dependencies is hard. Uh, Python, I think,
yeah.
is possibly a little bit ahead of us, but it still has its own challenges, and people complain about it equally as much as I think. So another thing that I know you're involved in a lot is with GDevCon, and you guys are working on some new course or something. I don't know what. How would you describe it?
Ah, okay. So to take a step back, GDevCon in Europe is going to be in Brighton this year in September, and Brighton happens to be 20 minutes drive away from where I live. And, uh, and so I'm very excited to bring Brighton to my hometown. And as part of that, we're starting a new initiative where we want to make LabVIEW, but so where we want to have LabVIEW developers become better LabVIEW presenters. And it's something I spoke to Alan C. Smith about. I listened to the podcast you did with Darren, who mentioned, we want to get more LabVIEW presenters out there. And so, as part of our initiative, is for those people who have a concept of an idea that they want to talk about, submit your abstract to us or submit your ideas. And there's a checkbox where you can say, I want some mentoring. And we'll be hosting two online classes. The first class will be about how to refine your abstract and define your title. And so those who start off with a concept can then feel confident that, their ideas are highly likely to be accepted and will be interesting to the LabVIEW community. And the second one is once you've been accepted, which if you go through the first course, hopefully the second one will be on your doorstep, will be about presenter skills. Confidently standing up in front of 100, 200 LabVIEW developers, realizing that what you have to say adds value to everyone in that room. So yeah, I'm super excited. I hope we get more LabVIEW developers because at the CLA Summit, GDevCon, others, NI Days, NI Connect, you tend to see the same set of presenters.
Hmm.
And I know I'm guilty of that. This year at GDevCon, I took a year off because last year I did two presentations and I presented at all the other GDevCons. So I'm taking a year off this year. But yeah, I want to see some fresh blood in the presenter pool.
I will say, as somebody who presents a lot, is a different experience going to a conference when you are not presenting. And also, if you're not organizing, if you just go and have nothing to do, it is a way different experience than being, when you're presenting, you're your mind is thinking about your presentation, you're running over in your head, you're not paying attention. So that's
Yeah. Well, there's that, and also for me, I'm not very good at going up to people and socializing, creating conversation, that stuff. But if I have a presentation that I've done, it often encourages people to come up to me instead and
oh,
start a
afterwards,
conversation.
yeah.
Or even before, if they see my name on the
Yeah.
presentation list, there's a topic that we can start to discuss. Um, I think the topic at the last GDevCon where I didn't present, lots of people came up to me asking questions about VIPM and Dragon and wanted some on the spot tech support, which I don't mind, but
Yeah.
it's nice to have a presentation.
We definitely went through a bit of this at GDevCon NA this year because in past years, we've always wanted to try to balance existing presenters and new presenters, but we basically we would have 20 slots and we would get 23 presentations. And one or two of those presentations were ones that just did a poor job selling themselves or were spammy or something. We're just yeah, no, not that one. So it's pretty easy. This year we had 40, and so we had to choose between them. And there were a few that were easy, okay, yeah, that one just doesn't fit or something. But there were a lot of good ones that got rejected. Or I won't say rejected, not chosen. Rejected sounds bad. Uh, but that did not make the cut. And some of them were very good. And like there was a lot of discussion. I was just like, but the one interesting thing, and I'm curious of your thoughts on this, because I know that the GDevCon people in Europe, when you review presentations, you do it without seeing the names, blind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we specifically chose not to do that so that we could balance the new presenters with the existing presenters, and so
I,
I feel like if you did it blind, it would be very hard to do that.
so when abstracts are submitted, they go to one of our team members, Jenny,
Mhm.
who then takes out any identifying information and flags which of these abstracts are a first time
Ah, okay.
presenter.
So you still know
And
who the
so,
first timers
yeah,
are, yeah. So you can still
and so
balance that.
one person on the team knows who everyone is, but the rest of us who have a vote are
Yeah.
doing it blind.
Ah. No, that's a good
Uh,
way to achieve that and still preserve that. Because there is something to be said for the anonymity a little bit in that, like, yeah. But also too, like we've just found there are some people who are really, really good presenters, and some people need some work. And so like I guess part of that, I guess, is on us to try to provide more resources and help the people who really want to present but maybe need some more work to become better presenters. Um, I've
yeah,
definitely Norm and Darren have done some presentations on how to be the world's third best LabVIEW presenter or something, which I thought was a funny title. Uh, but to your point, I think you mentioned abstracts. I think that's actually important because I see lots of people who have good ideas, but their abstracts are just like don't really sell it very well. And in some cases, in our case, since I know the people, like I can go talk to them and I know what they're going to present on. And
yeah,
sometimes in the meetings, I'm an advocate for them. Like, okay, yeah, this abstract is not that good, but here's what this person's going to talk about, and I think it's really interesting, and we should consider it for that. And sometimes that helps. But like, if I didn't know the person, somebody whose name I didn't recognize submits something in the abstract so bad, I'm just like, yeah, no, we'll pass on that one.
yeah. There are pros and cons. I know that for a couple of abstracts where I've sort of had a hunch who submitted it, I've asked one of our team members to reach out to them and revise that abstract or focus on particular topics. Um, so yeah, there are definitely instances where um, the abstract isn't good enough, but I sort of get the vibe they are trying to deliver.
Mhm.
Yeah, I want people to succeed
Yeah.
and deliver the best version of themselves.
Yeah, and also we've had some conversations too where we talk to people and somebody puts something in and it's like super advanced, and like a handful of us are like, yeah, that's really interesting. But knowing the audience level is like a little bit lower, we have to go back to them and we're like, hey, we really like this topic. Talk about this topic, but make sure you do a gradual introduction so that the beginners aren't completely lost and they can kind of follow the discussion, and make sure that there's something in there for them. And then once they get something, then you can spend the rest of the presentation talking about all the advanced stuff and keep all the advanced users happy. That
Yeah,
takes an art in the presentation and in the style and the way you present it. But
it takes an art, as you say, and I think in the presenter skills workshop that I'll be delivering, I'll be focusing a lot on how to tell a story, starting off with the challenges you faced, the journey you took to overcome them, etc., keeping it high level. And I think as much as I want people to go to one of my presentations and be able to immediately implement something, I think it's more important to plant plant the seed so they know, hey, this topic exists. This is where you get started. This is how it's been helpful to me. But I've not then opened up a massive AF hierarchy and drilled down and tried to, I don't know, explain a new messaging construct
yeah,
or something.
part of what I always start my presentation, I try to think of what do I want the audience to take away from this presentation, right?
Yeah.
And I try to I think of it kind of holistic, like I'm investing a bunch of my time and energy into giving a presentation because it takes a bunch of prep time and I have to show up and I have to do it. So I should get something out of it. But also the audience is investing a lot of time and energy and effort just being there listening to me. So what do I want them to take away from it? And so I think the best presentations kind of merge those two things. I get something out of it either because it's an idea that I really want to promote or whatever, or it helps me sell a workshop I'm doing or something, right? Like I do a workshop on refactoring. So I go give a talk about refactoring and I give people a taste of it and I say, hey, if you want to learn more, here's my, so I would encourage people to be slightly selfish. I don't want to, it's hard, right? Because you don't want it to be too selfish because if it's just this sales push, that turns everybody off. And we've all sat at it and at the old NI week and sat there and listened to some NI sales rep get up there and drone on about the latest and greatest at NI, and we're just like, yeah, we're not interested. So it's a balance, but I do think like you should get something out of it. It should be a topic that excites you, that you're excited to talk about, and having some business tie-in at the end is kind of is okay. Like that as long as there's value for the customer, and the value isn't just like, oh, go buy my product, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I think so. I said that I wasn't presenting at GDevCon this year, but I am actually presenting at GDevCon NA for the first time. And the topic I'm presenting on in Chicago is a small passion project that I've had of connecting my new piano ability to LabVIEW and the obstacles I had to overcome for that. And so this that presentation is going to be 25 minutes of me, I think, getting excited about music and different LabVIEW techniques that I've just learned through I think having 8 hours free to develop this project, and I learned so much doing that. Yeah, very excited about presenting this.
Yeah, I think
I'll
actually
try
that was
not to give too much away.
one of the reasons that I voted particularly for your presentation because it was A, it was slightly different, and B, the enthusiasm that it brings. I feel like you definitely as someone organizing a conference, I want some high level technical stuff. I want a mix of stuff. I want beginner presentations, but I do want stuff that's going to get people excited. And generally the stuff that gets people excited is when the person getting up there is really excited about it. And so that, and to your thing too about like the storytelling thing, there are several presentations where it tells a story, and those are also quite intriguing because, I mean, people have been telling stories for like the entirety of human history, and like there is something about a story that just like excites people, and it kind of
Yeah,
resonates.
absolutely. I think if you go on YouTube and look up some of my very first GDevCon presentations, you'll see my presentation style then, like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, was very much a tutorial. I was effectively pretending like I was still working for NI and teaching a topic of object-oriented programming and active framework. And there was no story there. I watched it back. It was a very dry presentation about how to create a class and what methods are and yeah, I think in the 6 or so years since that presentation, I've really tried to work on storytelling.
Yep.
And so yeah, hopefully my presentations now are a bit more entertaining.
Yeah. No, I like even for the dry technical presentations about how to do XYZ, I think having a little bit of a story just to connect to like, here's where I actually use this, here's why this is important. I feel like the story makes that connection. Because if you just get up there and say, here's how you make a class, here's how you make a method, here's how you do this, and there's no like real world story woven into it. So I feel like you can do both, right? You can do a tutorial if you connect it to like, okay, I'm going to walk you through how I created this thing. And here are the steps that I took. And the steps are the tutorial steps that you would do if you're doing a tutorial, but there's a story behind it. I feel like yeah, it's always a good idea to add a little bit of a story just to kind of connect the dots.
As Tom mentioned, he'll be presenting at GDevCon NA 2025 in Chicago this summer. Tickets are on sale now, and you can find a link to purchase them in the show notes.
You
Yeah,
mentioned
sure.
YouTube. You are quite the prolific YouTuber. I'm kind of jealous. You have a lot of followers. How did that come about? And as somebody else who has posted some videos on YouTube, not anywhere near as nice as yours, how did you get so many followers? Is there some secret to it? Do you advertise it, or is it just like the content's that good and everybody just flocked
Um,
to it?
I'm quite a reserved person, so I don't, apart from like maybe a few LinkedIn posts, I never advertise my channel. Um, I think that channel started out, Tom's LabVIEW Adventure started out because I gave a presentation at NI Days in London back when NI Days was a thing. And and I got quite a few people asking me, "Hey, was that presentation recorded? I'd like to watch it again." And that presentation was about object-oriented programming in LabVIEW. And after maybe five people asking me this, I thought, "Oh, I'll do a quick series on YouTube." And it goes through the stages of what OOP is, creating a class, creating a method, like high level OOP mentality. Um, Even that received quite a good reception. And I think at the time it was the only uh, YouTube resource on OOP. And then from there, I got obsessed with Active Framework. And the way I learned Active Framework was to sit down with the manuals that Alan wrote. And I just studied them with a pen and a highlighter, trying to get my head around AF. And then once I understood it and I used it and I had taught it, I then created a YouTube series on AF. And again, it's there might be more tutorials out there now, but at the time it was the only video tutorial series on AF. Um, and I think after that I did DQMH. Um, that one, yep, I think that one also did quite well. But I think you can see the growth of me as a lovely developer through which tutorial series I put out. I started out on OOP, got obsessed with Active Framework, didn't stop talking about that for years. Um, in then, for I guess semi-political reasons at my old company, we moved over to DQMH. So I got obsessed with that and created my own scripting tools for that. And I think I worked more on optimizing DQMH than I did actually developing code using it, DQMH. But I created that series. Um, and so I think to answer your original question, it was just I developed tutorial series on things that didn't exist yet on YouTube.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, well, I think there's
yeah,
like a
it
timing
was,
aspect too, right? Because like the when you were doing those things were had just grown in popularity, as you said, and nobody had done a tutorial on them. So yeah, it was just kind of there, and you happened to hit the right timing. And I will say I very much like your teaching style. I think you're very good at breaking things down and explaining them. So I'm sure that helps a lot. But yeah, I do think there's always like an element of luck and timing, and like you happen to hit it at a
yeah.
good time that it just kind of took off. But
And I think at the time I was doing those YouTube videos, I had recently left NI. I was then working for Scientifica. And at that time, I was renting a spare room in someone's house. I had moved to a new city, didn't really know anyone there, so I was trying to I basically had a lot of free time
yeah,
to create these videos. Um, and people keep asking me, "Hey Tom, like when's the next video coming out?" Because it's been a while. It's like, well, I know since then, I've met my well now fiance, bought a house. Like I have a lot more going on in my life. So it's difficult to find the time. But yeah, I'd love to be creating more videos.
Yeah, it's hard to keep those things going. They come in spurts. You get some momentum, you start going, and then if you don't have a plan to keep it going, you don't. And also too, the thing that I see a lot of people do is they come in really hard and they create a whole bunch of videos, and then they just burn out and it's not sustainable. They don't really have a plan. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, definitely like with the podcast too. Like I'm a big fan of like do all the effort, but then put it out at a drip so that it like because audiences kind of expect like that recurring thing, and when they don't get it, then they tend to dwindle and go away. But I mean, I think in your case, your YouTube channel, I it's as much as it is like wanting to see new stuff and things, it's also like it's kind of a reference material. So a lot of the content's evergreen and it's still people are still coming to it and learning stuff from it. And
Yeah. And I try to keep it up to date when new major features come out. Like I created the AF series before interfaces were a thing in LabVIEW.
Mhm.
And so when they got introduced in 2020, I then did an addendum
Yep.
to that series.
Yeah, I also remember you've been doing the What's New in LabVIEW videos for that, which is also very good because uh, as an experienced user, I often don't pay attention to those. And like you've probably had this, like if you go teach Core 1 or Core 2, I learn things because like the students do something. I'm like, wait, I didn't know you could do that because like it's some editor shortcut that they added that I just hadn't bothered to figure out or to learn. So
The trick I learned when teaching Core 1 was connector pane switcheroo.
yeah.
In one of the exercises, a student was asking me, "Oh, hey, it says here to do control and then click on the terminal to switch the wires, but it's not working for me. Can you show me?" I was like, "Yep, yep, I'll give it a go." And sure enough, yeah, it worked for like add functions or Boolean functions, even connector panes. Um,
Did you
and since
manage
then,
to
I've
hide
been
your
using it
excitement from the
all the
students, or
time.
you're like, oh wow, I learned something?
Uh,
I don't know.
Well,
I like sharing that with the students actually because I think I find it kind of funny, and also it's like trying to give. I don't want to give the students the impression that at any point you should know everything because like nobody knows everything about LabVIEW. It's just like such a big. I mean, the only people who are close are like Stephen and Darren and Norm, and like even they don't know everything. So
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think it helps that when I present, I try to be as enthusiastic as I can be anyway. Um, and so my true excitement hopefully merges into the I guess the facade
Yeah.
I put on as a teacher.
Speaking of teaching, you also have a course on Udemy.
I do. So that that course I put out in 2021. I had just moved to the house I'm in now, and it was originally for an Indian company who had a lot of students trying to learn LabVIEW. So I produced a I think a 9 lesson training course, a total of I think 10 video hours, event exercises and homework activities. And then when that contract ended, or I think I put in a clause, I made it publicly available on Udemy.
Mhm.
And so that's going pretty well. I mean, I guess it's sort of LabVIEW Core 1 with a bit of Core 2 to compare it to the NI courses, but it's really aimed for students with a limited budget. The level of entry to that course, I think, is $50.
Mhm.
And so it's accessible. And, if people message me on LinkedIn saying, can I have a code? It's a bit much for me. I'll just give it to them for free. Um, it really comes down to I want to grow the use of LabVIEW. And yeah, like if I can give someone some training material that's gonna get get them to use LabVIEW for the first time, hopefully get excited by it. I think that's great. I know that Steve Watts is doing a similar thing, isn't he, with the community training initiative.
Yep.
I saw his demonstration of teaching LabVIEW on Linux using a was it a Raspberry Pi?
Yeah, the Pico. But yeah.
Pico.
Yep.
Great. And so yeah, there's some great content there. Um, yeah, I'm feeling positive that there's resources out there for students and people who just want to learn LabVIEW with a lower barrier of entry.
Yeah, I'm on Reddit a lot, and people ask how to get started with LabVIEW, and generally the first thing I tell them is to go check and see if they have the SSP and they can go do the self-paced training. Because if you're already paying for it and you have access to it, that's like a great place to start. But your course is the second place I send them usually. I should probably start
Glad
sending
to hear it.
AI too now that that's a thing. But those are like my go-tos. It's like, hey, if you can't afford, because yeah, students aren't going to pay a couple grand to take NI Core 1 and Core 2. It's generally not going to happen. So I feel like your course, I have to say I bought a copy of your course and I have not sat down and looked through it. I need to do that at some point. I kept meaning to, and it's just like, yeah. But when you first put up, I was like, I'll buy a copy and support Tom. And but yeah,
I appreciate that.
yeah. So, but you mentioned growing the community. I know recently has started doing more academic outreach. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think for a few years now, the LabVIEW champions have been giving NI a bit of a hard time about, to put it lightly, about you've cut off your stream of new LabVIEW developers into the community. Where's the funding for academia? Where's it gone? Um, but actually, the meetings we have with Eli and Eric and the rest of the team at NI, it sounds like they're taking it seriously now, and so I think anything we can do to promote that and support them is a great move. Um, and I've let them know that I'm happy to go into my local universities around here in England and maybe teach a Welcome to LabVIEW course. And yeah, I think they're being receptive to that, and the other champions taking part in that as well.
Yeah, actually, that's moving quite quickly because in maybe 2 weeks, I'm going to go do one at the local university here. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, it's definitely it's got legs. So, that's good.
Is NI giving you the material for that?
Yeah, it's
Are you
the
creating it
NI
yourself?
getting started. So, it's
Oh, right.
it's not necessarily the greatest material, but it's good enough for university students. It's a good introduction, and so yeah, I personally I would prefer they do the CTI because I think it's a little bit broader. Because they're getting started is just like setting up DAC-MX and simulating devices and how do you talk to NI devices, and that's great. The CTI is more about
That's
talking to other
yeah.
instruments, and so like when Nancy and I taught thing at CU Boulder, we did both, and it worked out well. They had some NI equipment. We showed them how to use the NI equipment, but they also had a whole bunch of a rack of other power supplies and function generators and stuff that all just talked over Visa. So having the CTI that helped a lot.
When Steve was giving me the demonstration of the CTI hardware, um, I was getting super excited. I'm going to buy one for myself and try it out because for what was it, $50? If
Yeah,
that for this
it
Pico?
was dirt cheap. Yeah, the
Uh,
Pico's like $4, and then you buy a little
oh
board
right.
too. So yeah, they're really
Uh,
cheap.
But you can run LabVIEW, interact with hardware,
Mhm.
immediately start getting signals and control data. Yeah,
Well,
it's
they're getting
exciting.
down to where they've got these single board computers. So there's these RAGSA computers that have it's a single board computer. It's like yay big. It's pretty small, but it has the Pi Pico built into it. So you get the computer, the Pico, and they're trying to get to the point where they can just drop a Linux image on it with LabVIEW already installed, and you just hand it out to people, and they just go, which is pretty cool. So,
Nice.
because I mean, part of the challenge, one of the things I've been ragging on NI about a little bit is just the ease of trying LabVIEW. So, for example, if I want to try Python or Rust, I can go and in a web browser, I can open up an interpreter and start typing in commands and hit enter, and it runs, and I can kind of see what it's about. With LabVIEW, like we have the community edition, but in order to get the community edition, there's a bunch of hoops to jump through. I don't know if you've tried to install it lately, but it's
Yeah, I have
real.
tried that. And like the students on my training course, when they download it and try to um, license it with the community edition,
The
I
activation has problems sometimes.
yeah, and I think do you have to download a specific version of LabVIEW for community edition or create a NI account and get a
Yeah, you have to
password
create
and
an NI account and then
it's
you have to download a specific community version. And I don't think the community version is available for every version of LabVIEW. I think there's like a 2020 version and a 2024 version, maybe. So there's some limit.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I you can't then go from the community license to a professional license in that version of LabVIEW. I might be mistaken there. Feel free to correct me in the comments.
I
But
don't know all those intricacies, but yeah.
I, yeah, I saw something on the NI Ideas Exchange. I think it was the NI Ideas Exchange of, hey, could we just remove the LabVIEW community licensing requirement? Just have it one click download. Sure, if you download Community Edition, maybe you create a NI account,
Yeah.
but that be it. Just
Yeah,
get rid
yeah,
of
it's a weird
the
license. Like
hoops.
it's a yeah, it's a 1 year license and then you have to reactivate it again every year and it's like yeah. It would be nice not to have that. I mean, I think anything we can do to lower the barrier to entry to LabVIEW. Because I remember when they did the subscription thing, I remember having a conversation with Eric. He's like, "Well, isn't LabVIEW worth whatever the subscription is?" And I'm like, "Yes." I was like, "But I know that already. If I didn't know that, if I'm just a college student and I'm looking at Python that's free and easy and has no hoops, and I'm looking at LabVIEW where it's a paid thing and I have to jump through a bunch of hoops to even try it, my likelihood of even trying it is pretty low. And until you can get people to try it, it's hard to sell them on the value. Once they try it and they
Yeah.
see it, they're like, it's easy to recognize the value. But if they can't try it and see the value, then it's really hard proposition.
Yeah. And one of the points I raised at the last GDevCon was downloading and installing LabVIEW can actually be quite a quick process. You can do that in 15 minutes. But the trouble is you download LabVIEW, download it through NI Package Manager. You then need to deselect everything
Yeah,
that
checkbox roulette.
NI package, yeah. And like because we're experienced LabVIEW developers, we know we can deselect everything, install, and you'll get a baseline
Oh, do
level
we? Honestly,
LabVIEW
I don't know. I,
installation.
I just randomly
But
pick. I'm like, I don't think I'm using that. I don't think I'm using that. But like, I don't like see drivers for X, and I'm like, do I use X? I don't. Maybe. So I leave most of them checked, to be honest.
really, okay. Well, I uncheck everything, get a base level
Oh,
installed, un unless I know I'm going to be using Visa or DACMX. Or
yeah,
yeah,
Uh, yeah. I'm an experienced person, and I don't know
it's
what I can check or uncheck. Like, there are some things, like obviously, like the G web stuff. Okay, yeah, I'm not doing any web stuff. That's fine. But like some of the other, like the underlying drivers and runtimes and stuff, I'm like,
well, I sort of think if you're installing a LabVIEW, the underlying drivers should be in that LabVIEW executable, or
correct.
at least in
Yeah.
that package that gets installed. It's not down to the end user to make sure a box is checked.
Yeah. Well, though also there for a while, I remember there's actually like two sets of checkboxes. You check one box and it says, "Oh, here's some other stuff you might want," and there's some duplicates there because I remember some JKI stuff. I think VIPM shows up in both places.
Yeah,
For a while. I don't know. Maybe they changed that, but yeah, that was definitely confusing. And it's like, It's not just like click. You got to click through and highlight and click and then also the other a pet peeve of mine is when the activation license window comes in. I always type in my code and you have to hit the button next to the code, not the OK button at the bottom. And I always go to the OK button and I stop
Oh,
myself. I'm like, wait, don't click that. That's the wrong one. And it's like such a UI.
okay.
Like I'm like, oh
I'm glad that's not just me. That makes me so angry on a monthly basis if I spin up a new VM
yes,
uh, and have to activate it. On that point, this is a really small thing, but if you're on ni.com on your profile, you double click your serial number, Control C, Control V into NI License Manager. If
does it copy
you
some extra characters?
it copies a space at the end of your serial number,
Oh,
and the activation manager doesn't clear white space. And so it just says, no, your password's incorrect or your serial number isn't
that's funny.
recognized. It's frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely. I do. I want to say from some of our champions meetings, they've talked about the fact that and I realizes that's a problem they're working on it. I don't know what that actually means. I don't know what we'll actually see, but it does seem like that's at least a problem that's on their radar.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is good.
That being said, it's those two examples are things I get angry about, no, angry, frustrated about quite recently, but I've done nothing about it.
Yeah,
I've not checked to see if it's actually on the NI Ideas Exchange or after this call I'll put them up.
yeah,
But
yeah. Well, I think those things just come up at like the champions meetings when we're all complaining about stuff, or somewhere on the forum somebody complains about it, and then everybody comes out of the woodwork and says, "Yeah, that's a problem." But yeah. So recently, well, actually, I don't know. Has it been recently? How long ago did you move to JKI? That's been a couple of years now, right? At least 2, 3 years more.
um, it's I'm coming up to year number three.
Okay. And how has that been? Was it how was that transition? I imagine it was different.
It is it is different. I mean, I'll start with the similarities because I think at Scientific I was a solo developer, and now at JKI, I'm the only one in the UK working fully remotely with a remote 8 hour time difference to California. Um, and so, in that sense, it's very familiar. I can be behind my computer developing code. And I feel very efficiently because I have no meetings until California wakes up. So I can develop code for 6 hours non-stop. In then I have a 2 hour block of meetings and chats with the team. Um, but I think working with the JKI team and going from a solo developer to suddenly being one of the JK developers is everyone at JKI is a very experienced LabVIEW developer. And we have people like Jim Kring, who will a who, I don't know how he does it, maybe psychic powers with LabVIEW, but he'll be able to sort of look at a VI and then immediately understand or understand what the issues are with it. Um, and that comes with experience, but it's very I feel very fortunate to be able to work with people like Jim and Hunter, Sarah, the other developers at JKI, because I learn so much. I refer to it as the hive mind at JKI, where we can share ideas. We chat every day, not as a not as a stand-up, but just as a coffee morning. We'll
Hmm.
just chat about anything and be part of a team. Um, and yeah. It's great to be able to Slack one of my colleagues and just say, "Hey, how would you tackle this issue?" And I know that I'm going to get an expert response.
Yeah, it's good to have those resources.
Yeah. Um, I think it was a quite strange going from thinking I was an experienced developer to being in a pool of really experienced developers, realizing I had so much more to learn and the like actually doing LabVIEW. Sure, I know all of the design patterns I from this book, not not in general. I'm fluent in AF, DQMH, etc. But the mindset of how I analyze a set of requirements, that has changed significantly being at JKI.
I feel like there is this like I wrote a blog post about like the arc of the developer. I feel like when you first start, the challenge is making LabVIEW do what you want it to do. And then pretty quickly you kind of manage that. But then like the process and how you do things, I think becomes very important. The way you think about it, the way you break down the problems, doing things iteratively and getting feedback, all those things I think take a lot of time to develop. And also like being able to change code without just breaking it, the whole refactoring thing. Like a lot of people are just like, oh, I need to make this change. I'll just go in like a bull in a china shop and start ripping stuff out and replace it. You can
Yeah.
do that, and you may be successful at doing that, but that's not the best way to do it versus taking small steps and like running the tests every time and right. So those are like the things that I think you learn over time.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was like I've had a bunch of projects where the overall requirement is make this code better. And a customer has given me the VI, as Fabiola would call it, that does everything, but they have a few issues. And I used to start that project, and every VI I looked at, I would just neaten it up, and then move on to the next one, neaten it up, try to, oh, why are they doing it like that? I'll just delete that and make it more efficient, and then move on to the next one. Even I've re then I realized, oh, this code relied on that process because it relies on a race condition or it
Yeah, that's definitely one.
so I've made the code better, but it no longer works.
Mhm. The other thing I find too on a lot of that is that, and part of it is LabVIEW's graphical, and this might be a controversial statement, but I feel like we focus too much on straightening wires and not enough on fixing structure. So you get an ugly VI, and of course the first thing you do is rearrange controls and make the wire straight, and that's fine. But the problem is people stop there and they say, okay, I cleaned it up, it looks nice now. But the structure's still really bad and it's doing things in a very inefficient way. And it's like, yeah, there's a better way to do that. So,
Yeah, I mean it's sort of a halfway house. I think making all of your wires straight, I think allows you as a developer to look at that code and understand,
and then see the
oh,
structure.
this is how the data is being manipulated.
Hmm.
That's what this code is doing. Um, And I think you can do that within a minute, 2 minutes.
Hmm.
Whereas actually designing a new structure and
Yeah.
reformatting it properly,
Yeah.
it,
But also
it,
though,
it takes longer.
I think cleaning up helps you to see the bigger structure, but I don't think like the cleaning up doesn't necessarily need to be perfect, right? So like if you move everything around and the wires are like relatively straight, but maybe there's a few jogs or stuff, like that, like, VI Analyzer might complain about that, but I'm like, okay, I can see the structure. That's what I need to see in order to then be able to change the structure. And also too, I don't know, maybe this is just me, but I used to be OCD and obsessive about like every wire bend had to be straight and stuff. And eventually I realized like how much time I was spending doing that. And maybe I'm just
Yeah.
inefficient. I know Stefan has his shortcuts and he knows them all and he has them all memorized and he can clean stuff up really quickly. But for me, it was just like the time investment in making sure every wire was absolutely straight. At some
I
point,
think,
stopped paying off.
yeah, I'll admit I occasionally just use block diagram cleanup. Um, if it's a message wrapper
Yep,
or something on that scale, I will create it, control U, control space, control F, control S.
yep.
And so sort of cleans it up, moves the block diagram to the correct size, saves it, and I don't look at it again.
Well, I think that also goes with creating more smaller VIs. So I find when I create more smaller VIs, the cleanliness of each individual VI, if it's only got like two nodes and a couple, like it's class successor, two class things, an error and an unbundle, like you know that can be kind of messy, and you can still tell what's going on. It doesn't have to be like you know. Some people may obsess like it has to be exactly this size with these in exactly this position, blah blah blah, so they all look exactly the same. But I don't really. I feel like a block diagram cleanup, which actually in that simple case does not always do what you want it to do because the class terminals never line up and the wires are never
Yeah,
straight. But I'm like, do I really care?
it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
it's a private VI in a class that won't be used.
And you're not
What are your
likely to have
thoughts?
to change that ever, right? That's something that's like auto
Exactly.
generated. Like, yeah,
What are your thoughts on graphical versus text-based icons?
I am much. I'm not much of an artist. I like tech. I like graphical icons when they're done well, but I tend to just do the text based ones. If I'm going to do like a reuse code thing where I know I'm going to be using it all over and I'm going to ship it, I tend to do the graphical icons. But otherwise, for like within a project, I am happy with text based icons. I don't know where do you land on that? Are you a
I
graphic?
think I'm sort of the same. Public methods will tend to have a graphical icon.
Yep.
Private ones will start off as text-based, but I find as I develop code, I'm not very good at defining all of my sub VIs in the idea I have
Yeah.
about how I'm going to develop the code. And so the names of those sub VIs often change,
Yep.
which then means I need to change the text in my icon, which is something I forget to do sometimes. And so it's sort of like
That does cause
anti-documentation.
problems.
Yeah.
And also too, depending on how descriptive your names are, I like really long descriptive names and they don't fit. And also like even if they're shorter, but you use one long word, it like runs off the end, or sometimes it might hyphen,
Yeah.
and you're just like, eh. It never gets. Or you have three or four that are very similar, and the first like two or three words are the same, and that's all that shows up on the icon. And now you're like, oh wait, which one is which now? So yeah, those are. It's not perfect, but yeah, it's all a time trade off, and like how much time are you willing to invest, and what's the payout, and as you said, like again, things that are like framework based or that are utilities or things that I'm going to use all over the place, it's worth investing in that. But even like init, I have an initialized VI. Just init, it's easy, it's simple. It fits it fits in the middle. Like I know what that is. You know, sure you can put the little like what is it, the yellow star icon or something.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do. Just like the close one, I actually like putting an X, the red X. Like those are two. Like I usually have an init, and it'll have say init, and it'll have the thing, or it'll have like if it's a file thing, I'll put a file thing in an init just to let you know it's new. But yeah, I do have one last question that I like to
Yeah.
ask everybody. Can you tell me about an experiment that you tried that maybe didn't turn out the way you thought it would, and what did you learn?
That is a great question. And I've heard you say that question at every podcast, and I failed to prepare. So,
Um,
um, so something I did that didn't go too well. Um,
what
I
could
think at the
be
start of this,
than you expected? That's also valid.
at the start of this chat, I was talking about the Gang of Four design patterns and how I implemented them in a particular test executive project. And the code worked. The project's successful, but the load time of the project and the time it takes that particular customer to perhaps create a new test step or to expand functionality is all very logical, but you need to know, or you need to create a class that inherits from this class. You need to do these overrides. You, I don't know, there might be another linkage. Like there's quite a few steps that a novice LabVIEW developer might not understand naturally. Um, and so I think finish on that with the gang of four design patterns will solve your solutions, but they're not for every level of LabVIEW developer. I If I was to do that project again, I would perhaps made it much easier. Maybe instead of doing dynamic dispatch, there could have been just case structures in a couple of instances in that software, which would have been easier for that customer to expand functionality.
My mind immediately jumped
So,
to
go on.
what I've taken to do with those things, at least as a start, is to document it somewhere. So have a README and be like, hey, if you need to add a new thing here.
Oh yeah.
But then also like
Like,
making tooling, but I get tooling takes time and energy and effort and it's code to maintain. So I don't know.
so at JKI, I use Loom. I don't know if you've come across that before, but
It's a video
with
recording, right? Like
yeah, I can do a very quick, unedited screen recording that I can narrate over. And so for all of these things, like creating a new class, creating a new type of report, I will record a video of me doing it. The trouble is then making that video accessible to the user at the time they want to do it. Perhaps they're on a lab machine that's not connected to the internet, so they need to go back to their desk.
That is a problem.
And so there's a bunch of different factors. Yeah. The other thing you're talking about tooling, and I love scripting. I think the trouble is maintenance.
Yes.
If you add a brand new feature or a potential breaking change, you then have an entire scripting toolset you then need to update.
Yep.
And sooner or later, that scripting toolkit gets left behind. And then it becomes quite a big project to then update it all.
Well, also, I mean, even if you do the simple documentation thing, if you don't keep it up to date, then it lies, and then it's even worse because you're like, I followed the
Yeah.
documentation and it's not working. Why is it not working? No, oh, nobody ever updated it. So, but I think it seems to be in my experience that the two things that I like to see when I pick up a new project that I inherit from somebody that I almost never see is like good documentation. Even it doesn't have to be great, just a README with like, here's how you do this, here's how you do X, and then just some basic build scripts. Like I'm a big fan of like having like a basic build or test or install script or something, so that when I inherit a project, I look at the README. If I see, okay, it has tests, great. How do I run the test? Okay, go run the test. Good. At least I checked it out and I've got my environment set up correctly. Then how do I build it? And people just, I don't know why it's the case. I don't know if people don't think of it or if they look at it as extra work or whatever, but yeah, very rarely do I inherit a project that has that, but when I do, it's like, yes, this is great. So, yeah, nobody ever thinks about the guy who comes after them, I think. Maybe that's part of it. So. All right, Tom. Well, it's been a great conversation. So, yeah, it's good to catch up.
Cheers.
We haven't talked much.
Thanks for having me on, Sam.
To catch up. All right, thank you. That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the LV Experiment.